Hello ladies and gents, and welcome back to the Pokemon retrospective. If you're still here after the marathon that was my last few videos, then I sincerely appreciate it. I've stated that I love this franchise, as such I try my best to get involved in forums and online debates. However, as much as I like series such as Sonic the Hedgehog or Pokemon, a good majority of the time their fan bases are extremely negative, to the point where it drives me away. One common complaint that I constantly hear from people is that Game Freak and the Pokemon Company stopped trying after Generation 2. To be perfectly blunt, I find this statement to be complete bullshit, all thanks to this game. Yes, while the basic gameplay components never change all that much, the tweaks added such as the Pokemon Natures or the physical special split can be game changers in their own right. Nonetheless, I believe that the 5th generation was the coming of a new age for Pokemon, both in its release schedule and the quote-unquote effort that's apparently lacking from these games. When Black and White first came out in late 2010 in Japan and early 2011 everywhere else, I was shocked to find out how many people were tearing these games a new asshole for reasons that I'll get into a bit later. I was actually lucky enough to play this game on an emulator months before its international release. I don't recall much of my first impressions, but I at least liked what I saw. Fast forward a few months later and I actually got the game on my DS. Yes, I said DS. Despite the 3DS only being a few months away, Game Freak insisted that this and 2012's Black and White 2 were going to be a DS exclusive. That's a gutsy move, but I believe that was for the better. The 3DS didn't have the best launch thanks to a sloppy game library, so more people were more likely to own a DS over a 3DS. Perhaps a new 3D Pokemon game would have helped boost sales back then, but if Game Freak wasn't ready, then I wouldn't want them to bite off more than they can chew. Back when this game was still relevant, I put in over 500 hours of gameplay time, making it the video game out of my entire collection that I've spent the most time with. Needless to say, I saw something in this game, but I didn't know what that was at the time. I played this generation up until early 2013 with the announcement of Pokemon X and Y. When I say this game is underrated, I'm more talking about a fan response rather than a critical one. In all fairness, Pokemon has never really had a problem with the gaming news media. Replaying this game, I was cautiously optimistic. Was I just a naive fool blinded to mediocrity, or was this just another case of fandom outrage? Thankfully, since this game isn't all that old, nostalgia won't be coming into play here, unlike my last reviews. Oh, and just to be clear, I'll be primarily focusing on Pokemon Black, since that's the version of the game I happen to own. The differences between the two are very minor anyway, so I don't think it really matters. With all that said, let's begin. This is my review of Pokemon Black and White. Before the game even begins, you'll be treated to a small cutscene of somebody being crowned king of an organisation, who you'll later come to know as Team Plasma. In the previous games, you usually get an intro showing off the region, though saying that it's usually just an excuse to show off Game Freak's fancy visual effects. Here, I like that the intro actually serves a purpose to the game's narrative. You wouldn't know that yet, but it will become apparent as the game's story unfolds. When you start a new game, you'll be greeted by Professor Juniper. Between Cynthia and Professor Juniper, I'm glad to see that we're getting more prominent female characters in the series. You're then introduced to your two rivals, Sharon the Nerd and Bianca the Egghead. That's right, this time you get two rivals for the price of one. The adventure begins with Juniper coming over to your house in New Town to deliver a gift. Said gift contains 3 Pokemon for you and your 2 friends. Unfortunately, I haven't used Tepig much, so I can't really give my thoughts. It's a fire fighting type, so if you used Infernape or Blaziken last time, then you should go ahead and choose Tepig. Snivy was actually the Pokemon I chose on my first playthrough because of how cool it looks. However, after my second gym badge, I stored it away in the PC and never used it again. While I wasn't feeling Snivy the first time, in honour of my first playthrough 5 years ago, I decided to give this solid snake another shot for this review, and it finally clicked with me. See, Superior's best stats are defense, special defense, and speed. That seems like a very odd stat layout, and that's exactly what I thought. Where Superior turned itself around though, is when I taught it the move Coil. It buffs the user's attack, defense, and accuracy, so I'd use Superior speed to set up 5 or 6 coils. Then I watched as it murdered everything in one shot with Leaf Blade. On top of that, it could even take quite a lot of punishment, to the point where the final boss's Hydreigon couldn't even touch me. So yes, while we didn't get off to the best start, Snivy's a Pokemon I recommend giving a shot. That leaves the fan favourite of the bunch, Oshawott. I'll be honest, when the starters were initially revealed, I wasn't all that fond of Oshawott. It looked like the secret love child of Piplup and Buneary. Boy, did I learn not to judge a book by its cover, as I quickly found one of my favourite starters in the entire series. Samurot's best stats are attack and special attack, so if offense is the name of your game, then Oshawott is for you. It even has a diverse moveset with moves such as Ice Beam, Surf, Revenge and X-Scissor. So overall you've got some pretty nice type coverage. Bianca will pick the Pokemon that's weakest against yours and vice versa for Cheren. After the battle, you'll be tasked by Professor Juniper to go and explore the Unova region and complete the Pokédex. And here's where things start to get a little bit interesting. While yours and Cheren's parents allow you to go ahead, Bianca's father is heavily against her going out to the world by herself. A 10-year-old going out on their own with nothing but a Pokemon on their back is absurd, and it's cool that the game acknowledges this. This leads to Bianca having self-confidence issues as she later gets a Pokemon stolen from her. This subplot then ends in Nimbasa City, where Bianca's father comes to take her home, to where the gym leader Eliza has to intervene. She convinces him to let Bianca stay and follow her dreams. The premise of Pokemon is far-fetched to begin with, but I like that we're actually given justified reasons as to why Bianca's father was worried, what with her Pokemon getting stolen. This is something that YouTubers like me would often parody and poke fun at. Never in a million years did I expect Game Freak to question the premise of its entire series and pull it off as well as they did. Cheren on the other hand is pretty much your main rival, as he likes to challenge you to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of his Pokemon. This research eventually pays off in Black and White too, as he actually becomes a gym leader. What sells me on these two as rivals is that you'll constantly see them throughout the entire game. They're adventuring with you from beginning to end. Compare this to your usual rivals who'll show up for a quick battle and then fuck straight back off again. These guys will constantly help you out through double battles, and on the rare occasion even give you some nifty items. Unlike other rivals in the series, I get the feeling that Cheren and Bianca are actually my friends. Sure, they're not Gary motherfucking Oak, but you don't need to be a dick in order to be likeable. While I still prefer Barry as a rival thanks to his dialogue, I think that Cheren and Bianca are much more helpful in the long run. Where the story really wraps up is when you enter Accumula Town, where Team Plasma will be making an important speech. Getsus, their leader, will be questioning whether or not Pokemon really do want to fight for their trainers, or whether we're just enslaving them for our own personal gain. Soon after, you'll be greeted by a Pokemon trainer called N, who will ask to speak to your Pokemon. He says he's shocked to hear what your Pokemon is saying and challenges you to a battle. You later meet N again in Nimbasa City, where he'll creepily invite you on a Ferris wheel. Yep, this is awkward. Before departing, he tells you that he's the king of Team Plasma. His master plan consisting of beating the league champion in order to force the world's trainers to release their Pokemon. Now this is interesting. You may have noticed in my other reviews that I tend to skip over the basic 8 gym badges fluff. Here, however, the gyms serve as a driving force for the plot. It's no longer wanting to be the very best, you're on a race against time. If you don't get those gym badges, then the world will be doomed. N's plan is actually pretty damn clever too if you think about it. See, the other teams tried to harness a tremendous power and conquer the world through brute force. N's plan starts off much of the same. He uses the Dark Orb in Dragon Spiral Tower to summon the legendary Pokemon Zekrom. I like the theme that Gen 5 has this time around. It's all about light and dark, black and white, yin and yang. Why N is able to summon Zekrom is because he's pure of heart. Both orbs choose a hero if they feel that their intentions are selfless. Say what you will about N as a villain, but his goal is not inherently evil. Unlike Cyrus, who wanted to mould the world in his image, N wants to do what he thinks is best for both humans and Pokemon. The game establishes right from the word go that he loves Pokemon through a short glimpse of his childhood. He's also the only character in the series, as far as I'm aware, who can actually talk to Pokemon. N and Team Plasma are villains that I really like, because throughout the course of the game, you're constantly questioning whether they're bad guys at all. Maybe they do want what's best for Pokemon, and we're just harming their true potential. The point I'm trying to make is, who is wrong and who is right isn't exactly black and white, pun intended. But seriously, they really blur morality here, and I love it. They're just stating their point of view and letting people think for themselves. N on the other hand is using the system to his advantage, following traditional league rules and slowly climbing his way to the top. Sure, he's using a legendary Pokemon, but no one said you couldn't. It's all because of the league rules that the champion Alder is forced to fight N even if he knows he's going to lose. You try and counteract N's plans by going to the Relic Castle to obtain the Light Orb, but karma is a bitch and it isn't there. Instead, it's all the way back at the Nakina Museum. After that, you make your way to Opelucid City, where you walk in on one of Ghetsis' speeches. His part in Team Plasma's master plan is just to keep feeding the audience questions about the ethics of being a Pokemon trainer. He says once one person believes in this ideal world, soon enough others will follow along with them. Eventually it will get to the point where nobody will be left to offer a different point of view. This use of the bandwagoning effect is actually appropriate considering the treatment of this game by a select group of fans. As Ghetsis says, once something becomes the norm, even if somebody does have a difference of opinion, the likelihood is that that person isn't going to be taken seriously for it. When you reach the Elite Four, that's when things really go off the beaten path. Instead of challenging Alder at the end of the Elite Four challenge, you make a shocking discovery that Alder actually lost to N. The Team Plasma castle rises from the ground, attaching itself to the Pokemon League. N sits on his throne and claims that all trainers will be forced to release their Pokemon. You go to stop him until you're cornered by the 7 sages of Team Plasma, who are basically N's disciples. Right then and there, the Unova gym leaders come together and hold him off so that you can confront Ghetsis. Oh my god, you mean somebody other than the main character actually did something for a change? Let's take a break from the story for a second to discuss what I think about the gym leaders. Clay actually stands up and arrests a good portion of Team Plasma's goons, even helping you clear the entrance to Chargestone Cave after the fact. Eliza, as I mentioned earlier, helped motivate Bianca to continue with their journey. I also like Bryson and Drayden. Bryson because he's a ninja and Drayden because he has a badass beard. And as we all know, beards are awesome. One thing I really love is the visual flair of these gyms. In previous games, they were just themed buildings that had puzzles that you needed to clear. In Black and White, the gyms take on an identity of their own. For example, the Striaton City Gym is actually a restaurant where you have a puzzle about type weaknesses. If the curtain displays grass, hit the fire button. A subtle but clever way of teaching newbies about the core mechanics of Pokemon. What's even cooler is that your first gym battle actually changes depending on which starter you chose. If you chose Oshawott, you'll fight Silent, Chili for Snivy, and Crest for Tepig, each of them specialising in grass, fire, and water types respectively. That may seem a bit cheap for a first gym challenge. However, if you talk to one of the NPCs around the town, you'll be given an elemental monkey that's strong against the gym leader you'll be facing. I'm still going to put my hands up and say they really should have gone out your way to give it to you, otherwise that's one hell of a difficulty spike. Other examples of cool gym design I really like is the Driftvale Gym, as it's located deep in an underground mine, and the Mistralton City Gym, which is actually an aircraft hangar. I'm not saying that the gyms were terrible in the previous games, but I feel that the ones in Black and White are more distinct from each other. That, and I just like the fact that the bug type gym leader has a gym filled with honey. I don't know, it just adds to the flavour, and no, I'm not sorry. Before we talk about the finale, I want to highlight one room I found in N's castle. The room in question is actually just simply called N's room, where there's nothing but playsets and a single rare candy on the ground. What really sells me about this room in terms of its eerie factor is the music playing in the background. It's a slowed down version of N's theme, almost like some sort of creepypasta, suggesting that something isn't right. You reach the top of the castle where you face off with N in a one-on-one battle. Then suddenly the light orb will begin to glow, and that's when you realise that the legendary Pokemon Reshiram has chosen you to be its champion. Reshiram actually reminds me of a problem that I wanted to bring up last time but couldn't find the right opportunity to, since none of what I'm about to say applies to Giratina. Since Dominant Power mascot legendaries have become much easier to catch, so much easier in fact that the Lord of Time himself has a catch rate equal to that of a fucking Chatot. This might just be my inner fanboy talking here, but one of my favourite parts about the old games is trying to hunt down these rare Pokemon. Battle-wise, they don't really do much for me since they're not totally legal, but it's the thrill of catching them that I love. Call me a simpleton, but there's nothing more gratifying to me than lowering a Pokemon's HP, giving them a status ailment, and throwing a ball of your choice. In Reshiram and Zekrom's case, it's understandable. The final boss is coming up straight after, and Game Freak didn't want to ruin the pace by making you spend 2 hours trying to catch them. Still, it's sad on my playthrough of Pokemon Y, I was able to catch Yveltal with a single Ultra Ball. N heals your Pokemon after the battle to make it a fair fight. You're even given the option to put either Reshiram or Zekrom at the front of your party. Again, another little detail to show that unlike most group leaders, N is not a bastard and is genuinely doing this out of goodwill towards Pokemon. After beating him, N realises what you and him were fighting for all along. You were pursuing truth while N was pursuing ideals, with him rightfully saying that the solution doesn't come from rejecting ideas, but rather accepting both through compromise. This fits in with the yin and yang theme of the game. Both perspectives are just as valid, and one should never overshadow the other. You think you've won, but all of a sudden Getsus pops up revealing that he has no interest in the well-being of Pokemon. Instead, what he wanted to do is use N's kind-hearted nature as an example to trainers so that they'll follow him in his wake. Then, after everyone released their Pokemon, there'll be no one left to oppose him. This means that he could seize control of the Unova region without any effort. Hot damn, I don't usually say this, but that is an ingenious plan, and it really makes you reevaluate what's been going on so far. N was never the real antagonist, he was just a kid that had been taken in and brainwashed into believing a warped interpretation of what he really wanted, for Pokemon to be happy. Having had enough, Getsus challenges you to a battle where the scariest thing I've ever heard in a Pokemon game starts to play. This song is already ominous as it is, but wait until you hear what's being chanted in the background. Many Pokemon fans, including myself, have joked plenty of times saying that it's saying Dennis, which is actually fair enough, it does sound that way. However, once you learn what's actually being said, the truth couldn't be darker. The word being chanted here is penance, which is a term used to describe being punished for one's sins. That is some dark shit for a Pokemon game, especially when you consider the fact that Team Plasma has been telling us how evil we are for catching Pokemon. With Getsus defeated, N wonders if he's really worthy of being the hero chosen by Zekrom after all he's done. Alder then counters by saying that what matters most is where he and Zekrom are going to go next, and that one argument can never have all the answers. With all that said, you and N have a private heart-to-heart moment about the time you first met in Accumula Town. If you recall, N spoke with your Pokemon and says that he's shocked to hear what your Pokemon are saying. Earlier in the game, N asked you if you had a dream. Bidding you farewell, N tells you to make that dream a reality, ending Pokemon Black and White. My god, let's just take a minute to discuss what we've experienced. The Pokemon games have never been too big on story. We've had attempts at character growth, but nothing too major. The more I think about it, the lack of an engaging narrative surprises me. Pokemon is damn lucky that it's that charming, because RPGs are typically story-focused games, a component that these games tend to lack. That said, if Black and White 2 are supposed to be a testament to Game Freak's writing capabilities, then that's a damn good sign. Not putting enough effort into these new games, my arse. Team Plasma are like that one scene in the first movie done right. You know, the scene where they all start moping about Pokemon fighting each other, even though they've been fighting each other for the entire movie without a problem. And by extension, the entire series. For the record, I'm not playing that clip due to YouTube's bullshit copyright system, but I'll get to that movie eventually though, I promise you. You could argue that since Team Plasma use Pokemon themselves to battle you, they're just as hypocritical. Perhaps, but what makes it okay for me is that they are the antagonists. We are meant to find their methods questionable, yet what makes it even better is that you can actually find some credence into what they're saying. That piece of advice N gives you before departing is one of the most simplistic, yet effective messages I've ever heard in a video game. If you have a dream, you go out there and make that dream a reality. As somebody who's very unsure about where they're going next in life, those words really hit home for me. I'm saying all this about a Pokemon game. A series for the longest time was just about a kid collecting badges and beating up other trainers for cash. What? As much as I love the series, the whole beat the champion while occasionally beating up stock bad guy as a story has become more stale than Ash's failed attempts to win the league. The point is that Black and White went somewhere with its story that nobody expected it to go. In the end, I think it really helped me to understand what these guys are truly capable of. That said, a good story wouldn't mean a damn thing if the gameplay wasn't up to snuff, so let's see what Generation 5 has to offer. Usually I don't really start with a graphical critique, but I think it's necessary this time around. We still keep the same bird's eye view, however Gen 5 isn't afraid to wow you with different camera angles on the rare occasion. As you can see, Black and White decided to go for a pseudo 3D look, and the result is a visual treat. Keep in mind, not one generation prior everything looked like this, so I can only imagine how much this is pushing the DS. Generation 5's graphical style is like that bridge between Diamond and Pearl to X and Y. Speaking of bridges, back in my first playthrough of the game, I got a tremendous rush going across the Sky Arrow Bridge. Now, 5 years later, I got that exact same feeling again. In fact, it was so strong that I crossed it, just so I could run all the way back and cross it again. What can I say, these graphics were unlike anything I'd seen from a main series game. I loved the fact that Castelia City was bustling with people. It gave what was supposed to be a big city much more life. I may not remember much of what I experienced back on the emulator, but what I do know is that these graphics definitely blew me away. This may not be a 3DS title, but you can sure as hell pass it off as one, and in fact in some respects I prefer these graphics over X and Y. Unova was a one-of-a-kind region in the Pokemon world at the time. It wasn't actually based off a location in Japan, but rather parts of New York City. The more you know. Not every location was a hit with me, as there are places I do find rather forgettable, however there's still plenty of positive things I can say about it. Nimbasa City is great, as it's like one big amusement park. There's a football stadium you can go to for daily training battles, flashing neon lights, and the gym even has a built-in roller coaster. One touch that I really enjoy between the two versions is that Opelucid City looks completely different. In black it looks all futuristic and bright, but in white it looks like a relic of the past. Another example I can think of is Black City and White Forest. Have a guess which one belongs to each version. Black City is a bunch of rare items you can buy like coloured shards and evolutionary stones. White Forest on the other hand is some exclusive Pokemon you can catch as well as trade evolutionary items. I really like this, most of the time it just feels like there are two different versions to lock away some Pokemon between games, which to be fair is kinda what they do with White City. However, I do feel it makes each of the games feel more special. They even switch up the 8th gym leader. If you're playing Black you'll battle Drayden and Iris for White. That's enough graphical talk, let's go on with the new stuff that Generation 5 brings to the table. Black and White introduced a grand total of 156 completely original Pokemon, even surpassing Red and Blue's sum of 151. The best part is that a good 95% of these Pokemon are either good or absolutely fantastic stat-wise. Seriously, in the Desert Resort alone you have access to Sigilif, Darumaka, Scraggy and Sandile. No joke, the first time I played this game I was extremely underleveled because I decided to pick up 3 of these for my team. There's Excadrill who has Horndrill, which is the one-hit KO move. What makes one-hit KO moves unreliable is the fact that they aren't very accurate. Excadrill fixes this with the move Hone Claws as it increases its attack and accuracy. So while your attacks may take some time to set up, you'll have a sweeper in no time. Zoroark's awesome too, it was originally available for a special event. If you take an event Shiny Legendary Beast to the Lost Thorn Forest, you'll have a chance to catch Zoroark. These were given out just a few months before Black and White's international release. The only one I managed to get hold of is the Shiny Suicune, which I still have by the way. If you missed your chance to get one, don't worry, Zoroark becomes readily available in Black and White too. Zoroark's best stat are physical/special attack as well as speed, so it's ideal for sweeping. Furthermore, it has one of a kind ability. It will take the form of the Pokemon in the back of your party until it gets hit. Surprisingly though, the type that got the best deal out of all of this is the bug type. Excelgor, Excavalier and Volcarona are all viable team options. Generation 5 by far has some of the weirdest evolutionary requirements I've ever seen. In order to get Excelgor you need to trade Shelmet for Carablast and vice versa for Excavalier. I'm not going to go over every great Pokemon in this game because trust me there's far too many to count, but I do want to talk about one more. Victini was a Pokemon that was given out at launch through Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. Victini is indeed a legendary Pokemon, but at the time I didn't know that. What drew me to Victini was its typing, Fire Psychic, my two favourite Pokemon types. To this day I still have my level 77 Victini from days gone by. God, those were good times, I want to be a kid again. I thought it might be best to emphasise the positives of these new Pokemon. A lot of people claim that Game Freak lost their touch when it comes to their visual design. They say these new mons have nothing on the games of old, more than likely referring to Red and Blue. I'm sorry, but no, I often try to be respectful, but that is complete bullshit. Generation 1's Pokemon weren't all that original either. Sure, you've got guys like Bulbasaur and Kabutops, but you've also got incredibly uninspired ones like a bird, a rat, and another bird. Hey guys, I've got this snake Pokemon, right? And you know what I'm gonna call it? Ekans. You know what that means? It's snake.
Spelled backwards!
And they do the exact same thing with Arbok. Get a load of this one. I've got this Seal Pokemon, right? And stay with me on this. You know what I'm going to call it? Seal.
Imagination.
Electrode is literally just a Pokeball with eyes.
fucking genius!
You're probably raging at me saying that I'm being unfair for judging a whole generation on a select handful of Pokemon, and to that I say, exactly. I hate it when people point at Pokemon like Vanillux and use it as an excuse to write off the whole of the roster as crappy and uninspired. That and the visual design isn't everything, like I said when talking about Oshawa. I may have found it ugly to start with, but when I battled with it I found something beautiful inside. I don't think Vero's all that original, but does that make it any less practical? No it doesn't. Does it mean I like it any less? Again, hell no. All I'm saying is that anything you throw at Gen 5's roster, I bet I could apply to every other generation. I want to repeat that I don't hate these games or their Pokemon. Heck, my favourite Pokemon of all time originated from Red and Blue, so I obviously can't hate them that much now, can I? And anyway, what's wrong with Pokemon being based on inanimate objects anyway? Personally, I think Pokemon like Chandelure and Cofagrigus are really cool. And speaking of Cofagrigus, did you know that both it and Frostlass cannot be put on the GTS without a nickname? The reason for that is because Nintendo implemented some all new centers, designed to prevent a specific string of letters from being entered. Because Cofagrigus and Frostlass's name contain the words fag and ass respectively, you cannot put them on the GTS. My guess is that Nintendo felt a little bit uncomfortable with children calling their rivals inappropriate names. That said though, I do have a few criticisms with the Pokemon you have access to. From start to finish, the only Pokemon that you can catch are the ones introduced in Generation 5. It might sound like I love that, and indeed I do, but these games aren't made primarily for me. You gotta look at things from somebody else's point of view too. Familiarity, as I may have said in my other videos, is still very important. Because Generation 5 doesn't let you catch older Pokemon until the post game, some fans may have felt a little bit alienated. If that's the reason for the vile hatred for these Pokemon, then I understand where you're coming from. While this isn't a reboot based on the tone of the overall game and the lack of recognisable faces, it certainly does feel like it. Pikachu isn't even in this game, instead we get a Mulga, one of the few Pokemon in this generation that I couldn't really give any shits about. It's a catch-22, if you try to incorporate older Pokemon into the game, then you have less space to add new ones. Equally, if you stick with the new and forget about the old, you run the risk of losing a good portion of your hardcore fanbase. Still, I don't think it's right to bash this generation's Pokemon because of this decision. However, upon further evaluation, I can at least say I understand why people feel the way they do. Guess what Alder said is true after all, no side has all the answers. As for me, I'm under the mindset that as long as these Pokemon are usable, then they're alright by me. Which brings me to the different types of battling. Ruby and Sapphire introduced double battles. They were fun every now and then, but single battles will always be my first choice. Black and White introduces two new types of Pokemon battling. The first being triple battles. Self-explanatory really, your opponent has 3 Pokemon and you have 3 Pokemon and you fight each other, that's it. What I'm more interested in is rotation battles. Like triple battles, rotation battles have you send out 3 Pokemon at a time. Unlike triple battles however, you can only control 1 Pokemon at a time, and you can only hit the opposing Pokemon in the center. Rotation battles bring in a new element of strategy, in that you have to predict which Pokemon your opponent is going to switch to. If you don't really care for any of this, then don't worry, these types of battles don't really occur much in the main game. They're more a fun thing you can do in multiplayer, and that's how it should be. There is a feature in Generation 5 that's no longer available, but was cool enough that I thought I'd talk about it briefly. It was called the Dream World. Basically, you'd put your Pokemon to sleep and go to the Global Link website. There you could catch Pokemon with hidden abilities like Speed Boost Blaziken and Drizzle Politoed. It was cool at the time, so I thought I'd mention it. One aspect that I absolutely love is the fact that TMs are no longer one-use items. Thank God. Some might argue that it breaks the game just teaching Thunderbolt to any Pokemon you want. I will beg to differ. I like it thanks to the competitive aspects of Pokemon. I can experiment with different movesets without having to spend all my cash at Game Corner just to acquire a rare TM. Not to mention that there are some TMs that you can only use once per playthrough. There's also some new abilities I really like. Sturdy no longer prevents one-hit KO moves, but one-hit KOs in general, which is excellent for slower Pokemon like Gigalith. A Pokemon like Cofagrigus can nullify a Pokemon's effect if hit by a physical move. My favourite new ability is one called Moxie, which gives the user an attack boost every time they knock out an opponent. Black and White also has a pretty meaty post-game, as there are 3 locations you have yet to visit. One of those being Undella Town, where you can face off against Sinnoh champion Cynthia, which is actually the first bit of gameplay I saw when it came out in Japan. As per usual, there are Lendras to catch, and I think this is one of the weakest sets of Lendras in the series, if not the weakest. Kyurem's design looks goofy to me for some reason, and I've yet to discover why. The Musketeer trio are just there. To me, their visual design isn't as appealing nor majestic as Johto's Lendru beasts. On top of that, I don't feel that their base concept is as interesting as the late trio of Sinnoh. They aren't bad Pokemon, in fact I really like the design for Cabalon, but I'd take other Lendras over these guys any day. However, if there's one thing that I will always remember about Black and White sets of Lendras, is the day I got Keldeo. For those who don't know, sometimes Nintendo give away event Pokemon at select gaming retailers. At the time, Keldeo was one of them, and he was the one that my 14-year-old self wanted the most. I managed to convince my parents to take me down to get it on the grounds that I was also going to pre-order Pokemon Black 2. That was my first in-store Pokemon event, and hopefully it won't be my last. After beating the game, you can catch some iconic Pokemon like Tyranitar or Lapras. Occasionally, you might see a patch of rustling grass or a ripple in the water. If you fish or run into it, then you might encounter a rare Pokemon. Believe it or not, you can actually catch Milotic by fishing in the rippling water. It takes a while, but if you're persistent, then this is the easiest method to get one. Dust clouds and caves actually have a secondary purpose, as they will give you gems to power up your moves and evolutionary stones. Similarly, special wings can also be found on bridges, which will increase a specific stat by 1 EV point. If you're really into that sort of stuff, go for it. Most of what you'll be seeing though is Ordino, a poor man's Chansey who's only really worth it for the experience points. Hey, I said I like these guys, but I never said all of them were perfect. There are some shit ones here, like Alamomola who has HP but none of the stats to back it up with, on top of being the biggest insult to Luvdisc I've ever seen. And believe me, I'd never thought I'd be defending Luvdisc. Another thing I never thought I'd say is that Generation 5 will make you love Zubats, because Woobat is complete trash, more so than the Pokemon who is quite literally trash. At least with Zubat you got Crobat for your troubles, one of the fastest Pokemon in the game and an excellent sweeper. Swoobat's stats on the other hand are so underwhelming you're better off going with the former. Generation 2 introduced day and night cycles into the mix, where certain Pokemon would only come out at a specific time of day. Now in Generation 5 we have seasons which change every in-game month. This can also affect what Pokemon you can encounter. The only one that immediately comes to mind is Cubchoo, who's only available in Twist Mountain during the winter. Shame too, because I would have used it on my team otherwise. They even made a Pokemon based around seasonal changes. That being the Pokemon Deerling, who will be a different colour depending on which season you caught it in. Kinda reminds me of Gastrodon from Gen 4 in a way. In terms of stuff you can do to get more bang for your buck, there is of course the Battle Subway, which is just a discount Battle Frontier, and the Pokemon Musical. Like contests, I don't really pay much attention to these, though I did take part in a few and I've got to say it's some of the funniest shit I've ever seen. This is honestly quite charming and I'd honestly recommend giving musicals a go just to get a good laugh. You may also remember that you didn't exactly take your place as champion at the end of the game. In fact, battling older and becoming the champion is merely just a side quest this time around. You don't have to rematch the Elite Four if you don't want to. Nonetheless, if you do decide to take him on, be prepared. He has Pokemon upwards to level 70 and can easily catch you off guard. Makes you wonder why he lost to N in the first place. Perhaps it's like Red, incredibly overleveled, but his EVs are so poor he's been beaten by a bunch of level 50s. That's what you get for using nothing but rare candies. Like with Generation 4's Power Park, you can transfer Pokemon from a previous generation, only this time it's much more complex. Before, all that was required was a DS or a DS Lite, since the DSi doesn't have a GBA slot. Then all you'd need is a game from each generation. Now, not only do you need both games, but you also need 2 DS systems in order to transfer. This game is the reason why I bought myself a second DS. I'd like to say that this was a poor decision on Game Freak's part, but I don't see any other way they could have done it. Pokemon Black and White soundtrack was and probably still is one of the best soundtracks we've gotten from the Pokemon series in a very long time. I still remember facing Team Plasma for the first time and getting that distinct feeling of, oh yeah, it's on, bitch. Nimbasa City's theme is one of the most cheerful in the series, and it always manages to put a smile on my face. However, my favourite song in the game is one titled Emotion. It's a beautiful piano piece that plays when the characters in the game are having a particularly heartfelt moment. Sometimes I listen to this in my downtime as a means to clear my mind and reflect on things. It's a really soothing song and I recommend you give it a listen. I guess the only thing left to talk about is the online mode, but as you may have deduced from my last video, the servers have been shut down for this game too. You'll have to excuse me if I lack footage for this part, but I'll do the best I can. Black and White made it so that you can now battle and trade with anyone across the world. Trading has also got an upgrade. There's the regular old GTS of course, but there's also another method of trading, where you and another player show each other different Pokemon until you come to an agreement. And that's Pokemon Black and White. Now this is usually the part of the video where I wrap things up, but not this time. The tradition for Pokemon up until now was to release 2 games, and then a few years later, release an improved version. However, it seems like Game Freak themselves saw that they had something going with the story of the last game. Instead of making a Pokemon Grey, they made the first direct sequel to a main series Pokemon game, Pokemon Black and White 2. The question remains, is this just sloppy seconds, or is this one last hurrah for the DS? Well, let's find out now. Let's take a look at Pokemon Black and White 2. Jesus Christ, I'm going to surpass the length of my Emerald video. 2 years have passed since the first Black and White. Team Plasma have been dealt with, and the 2 heroes of Unova have been absent for some time. You start in Aspertia City where Professor Juniper calls your mother saying that she's offering you a chance to become a Pokemon trainer, because the status quo is God. We meet up with our rival, default name being Hugh, to go find Juniper's assistant, who turns out to be Bianca from the last game. What's interesting is that Hugh's been a Pokemon trainer way before you have. Whichever starter you choose, he would have raised the one that counters yours, so standard stuff there. The starters are also the exact same as last time, so I really don't need to repeat myself. As for Sharon, he's become the leader of Aspertia City's gym, believe it or not. This may seem like the same old world you lived in, but things have certainly changed, as you will no doubt see. Shortly after setting off on your adventures, you'll come across what looks to be a Team Plasma grunt. After you beat Team Plasma in the first game, they were split apart into 2 separate factions. The old Team Plasma, who follows N and his ideals, and the new Team Plasma, who follows Ghetsis and his plans for world domination. Yet again, I love this dynamic, and I'm going to use this pun again, the villains are not black and white. Some of these people, like N, genuinely thought they were doing a good thing, and just got caught up in Ghetsis' dictatorship. Not sure about the pirate getter, but I don't have the best fashion sense either, so who am I to judge? Hugh, as you learn, actually has a bit of a vendetta against Team Plasma as they stole his sister's Purloin, which triggers a bit of guilt from old Team Plasma. Neo Team Plasma's plans this time around is to harness the power of Kyurem to engulf the world in unbreakable ice. You chase them all the way to Giant Chasm, where Ghetsis legitimately tries to kill you. No joke, he orders Kyurem to attack you directly, which probably would have killed you had N not interfered at the last minute. With N and Zekrom now on your side, you think you have the upper hand, but no, this was all part of Ghetsis' plan all along. He uses the DNA spices that he stole in Opaloosa City to fuse either Zekrom or Reshiram with Kyurem, to create Black Kyurem and or White Kyurem. Unfortunately for him, you knock it out, causing the 2 Pokemon to become separate again. Ghetsis makes one last attempt at beating you, but to no avail. Before leaving, N tells you to complete your journey by battling the Elite Four and becoming the champion. Speaking of which, Iris is now the champion. Kind of unexpected, but a good fight overall with some impressive visuals. I know I skimmed over most of the plot, but unlike Black and White, its sequel isn't as meaty as far as story is concerned. I like what was given to me, so I'm not going to complain, but the first game definitely had the better story. That said, Black and White 2 has the same appeal as the Kanto portion of Gold and Silver, in that you get to see what's changed in such a short time. One of Black and White 2's key standout features is Memory Link. If you connect Black and White 1 and 2 together, you unlock extra bits of story content that explains what happens to the characters between games. This is an incredibly cool part of the game, and it clearly shows that Game Freak knew Black and White's story had potential. If you can't link your games together, there are videos on YouTube that compile all the Memory Link scenes. Having Black and White 2 on hand also gives you a couple of other benefits too. The first being the ability to obtain all 3 Regis, and the second being an easy and hard mode, which you unlock after beating the game for the first time. I appreciate being given the option to make the game easier or harder, especially since I can beat these games in my sleep. I just don't like the fact that they're split between 2 versions. Do it with legendaries, don't do it with something as simple as difficulty options. Black and White 2 also has some new areas for you to explore, one of them being the Strange House, which changes layout every time you enter a room. What scares me about the Strange House, in a similar way to the old Chateau in Platinum, is the lore behind it. When you acquire the Lunar Wing in order to catch Cresselia, this girl will say it's already too late. By reading these books and piecing together what we know about the Lunar Wing in Platinum, it's heavily implied that Darkrai actually killed this girl. The tragic part about this is that if you've played that event or seen the Rise of Darkrai movie, you'd know that Darkrai has no control over his powers. Pokemon may look like a happy-go-lucky game on the surface, but read between the lines and there are some surprisingly dark themes. By the way, if you haven't watched the Rise of Darkrai movie and you're a Pokemon fan, do so, it's really good. I mean that genuinely. I like the Pokemon anime and its movies, but I can't deny that they're pure junk food. This movie, on the other hand, is good enough that I would actually recommend it to people outside the Pokemon circle, and I can't say that for the other movies, that's for damn sure. Anyway, probably my favourite new location in Unova is the PokeStar Studios, where you create movies along with ex-gym leader Bryson. Basically, you're put in certain scenarios, and your move choices will end up changing the outcome of the movie. It's a fun little distraction, and unlike contests, it doesn't require much preparation, so I'm able to jump in and just have a good time. These new locations were added mostly because fans complained that Unova was too linear. I agree with that to a point, but then I also have to ask, why is that a problem? In other Pokemon games, you're always restricted on where you can go at a certain part of the story, so these games always feel linear to me by design. The only exception to this rule was the Kanto section of Gold and Silver, which to be fair was one of the best parts of the game despite how short it was. There is one addition that I've been saving for last, as it's by far the best battle facility put in any Pokemon game, even surpassing the Battle Frontier. The Pokemon World Tournament, or PWT, takes place in a stadium south of Riftvale, where trainers from all around the world gather to test their skills. What this means in terms of gameplay is that you get to challenge every gym leader from all 5 generations as well as every single champion. To a long-time Pokemon fans, this means so much. On top of that, you get some awesome remixes of the battle themes from those games. Black and White 2 is another game with a brilliant soundtrack. Most of the old tracks remain intact with added bells and whistles. If you enjoyed the soundtrack to Black and White 1, then you'll enjoy this one too, enough said. Same goes for the graphics, which somehow have gotten better since the original, especially the Marine tube, that looks stunning for the DS. The graphics impressed me then, and they still impress me now, so I have nothing more to add. Overall, I can say without a doubt that Generation 5 is my favourite Pokemon game of all time, and indeed, one of my favourite games in general. I don't know if I'd call this my favourite game of all time, but I do know one thing. The way this game clicked with me is unlike any other game in my collection. You don't put in over 500 hours in one game by accident. Black and White not only has some of the finest gameplay the series has ever seen, but its story never talks down to its audience. It's not what the kids call edgy by any means, but it's nice that after all this time, Game Freak is finally acknowledging their adult audience. Black and White 2 is actually a refreshing change of pace for the series. Sure, you might be travelling through the same region, but the journey is completely different. I personally think the balance between old and new Pokemon makes this game much easier to get into. I never expected to top Emerald in terms of video length, but this game is just as, if not more special to me than that game. Going through this game again gave me such a sense of joy, but also a sombre feeling. Generation 5 was barely 2 years old before it was axed, and that's truly a shame. And if I'm honest guys, I'm kinda getting the same feeling with Sun and Moon. It may be because I grew up in the Diamond and Pearl Emerald period, where the games took at least 4 years to come out, but I just feel like these generations are going by just a bit too fast. I mean sure, this was common back when Pokemon was first new, but the games are much more complex now. With all that said, I will never forget what Gen 5 did for the series. Rest in peace Gen 5, you were short-lived, but the impact you left on me will be a forever lasting one. Now, join me next time in the pseudo-finale of the Pokemon retrospective, when the series finally jumps to 3D with Pokemon X and Y.